Chapter 1. The Last Days of Peace. There's a certain sound a house makes when it stops feeling like home. It's not loud. It's in the way the floorboards creak a little differently, the way laughter fades sooner than it used to. For 35 years, our house in Prescott was filled with love and small miracles, the scent of Sunday coffee, the hum of my husband fixing things that didn't need fixing, my son's voice echoing through the hallway. I thought that peace would last forever, but it only takes one person to turn everything you built into a battlefield. She came into our lives smiling, calling me Mom. And little by little, she took pieces of our trust, until we didn't realize how much was gone. By the time I saw what she was doing, the home my husband and I built with our own hands was no longer ours. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and this is the story of how love turned into control, how silence became my mistake, and how I finally took back what was mine. I still remember the sound of the morning in our house, in Prescott, Arizona. The coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen, the wind tapping softly against the big living room window, the sound of my husband, Thomas, humming a tune from the 70s while he read the newspaper. For 35 years, that house had been our world. It had its creaks and quirks, but it held every piece of our life together. Every birthday, every argument, every quiet Sunday morning. It was home in the truest sense. Our son, Jason, had moved out more than a decade ago when he got his first job in Phoenix. He was always ambitious, always trying to prove himself. When he married Melissa, a sharp and confident young woman he met through work, we were happy for him. They seemed like a perfect match, both full of plans and energy. I wanted so badly to believe that she would become part of our family. But in 2013, things changed. Jason lost his job after his company downsized, and the young couple could no longer afford their apartment in Phoenix. Thomas and I had room, and we believed family should help family. When Jason called asking if they could stay for a few months, we said yes without hesitation. I still remember Thomas's words that night. He smiled at me and said, "It's temporary, Ellie. They just need a place to land." A few months turned into a year, and then another. The rhythm of the house began to change. Melissa was polite, always careful with her words, but there was something behind her politeness, something measured and deliberate. She was the kind of person who made suggestions that didn't sound like suggestions at all. She rearranged the living room to open the space, changed how we stored groceries to save time, and eventually took over managing the bills to make things easier. I didn't mind at first. I told myself she was just trying to help. But as time went by, I found myself asking permission to use my own kitchen, apologizing for interrupting her routines. She never shouted, never argued. It was all smiles and subtle corrections. "Oh, Eleanor, let me handle that. You always make it too salty," she'd say with that practiced kindness that left me speechless. Thomas noticed, of course. He would sometimes look at me across the dinner table, his expression tight. We both tried to keep the peace for Jason's sake. He worked odd jobs, still searching for a stable career, and Melissa kept reminding him how lucky he was to have parents who didn't mind supporting us. By 2021, they were still living with us. When Melissa announced she was pregnant, Thomas and I were thrilled. A baby felt like a blessing, a chance to bring light back into the house. We painted the guest room soft yellow and bought a small crib, even though Melissa insisted on setting up the nursery in the master bedroom. She said climbing stairs would be hard after giving birth. Without even realizing it, Thomas and I moved upstairs to the smaller room, giving up the space we had shared for decades. The baby, little Oliver, was born in February. I remember the first time I saw him, wrapped in a white blanket, tiny and perfect. My heart ached with love. I wanted to hold him, to feel that new life in my arms. Melissa refused. She said the hospital was too full of germs, and even after coming home, she made rules about who could touch him and when. I didn't argue. I wanted to keep the peace. 3 days after they came home from the hospital, I was arranging fresh daisies in a vase, humming softly like I always did. The house was quiet, and the morning sunlight poured through the windows. I heard Oliver crying in the living room and thought maybe I could help. I walked in, still holding the flowers, and smiled. "Do you need a hand, honey?" I asked gently. Melissa turned toward me, her face pale, her eyes sharp. She was holding the baby, rocking him slightly. "No," she said curtly. I hesitated, just a moment, before stepping closer. "He sounds hungry. Would you like me to warm a bottle?" "Don't touch him," she hissed, her tone cold and full of something I had never heard before. "Your hands are filthy. You've been cooking." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The flowers slipped from my hands, petals scattering across the hardwood floor. I stared at her, stunned, my chest tight. The words hit me like a slap. Thomas appeared in the doorway. "Melissa, what's going on?" She turned, her expression instantly softening. "Nothing, Dad, really. I just don't want the baby exposed to germs." But the way she looked at me, as if I were something unclean, stayed burned in my mind. I didn't trust myself to speak. Thomas crossed the room and knelt beside me, his voice low. "Ellie, are you all right?" I nodded, unable to look up. "It's fine," I whispered, but my throat ached. Jason entered a moment later, sleepy, holding his phone. "What's all the noise?" Melissa turned to him with that soft, controlled smile. "Nothing, honey. Just telling your mom to be careful with the baby." Jason rubbed his eyes and said nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't question her. He just nodded and went back to the hallway. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I stood up slowly, placed the broken flowers in the trash, and walked to the kitchen sink. My hands moved automatically, scrubbing, rinsing, wiping. I could still feel her words on my skin. Thomas stood behind me. "She shouldn't have said that," he murmured. "She's nervous," I said, even though I didn't believe it. "New mothers get scared." He didn't reply. The silence between us was thick. Then, softly but firmly, he said, "I won't let this slide." I turned to him, finally meeting his eyes. He wasn't angry, just steady, his jaw tight with quiet resolve. Outside, the Arizona sunlight spilled across the porch, bright and harsh. The baby stopped crying. The house went silent again, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. That morning, as I stood beside my husband, the scent of crushed daisies still on the floor, I knew something had broken. Not loudly, not violently, but in a way that would never be the same again. And somewhere deep inside, I understood that the quiet in our home had just become the calm before a storm. Chapter 2. The first signs of something wrong. For weeks after that morning, the house carried a different weight. Every sound felt sharper. Every silence stretched too long. Melissa stayed polite, careful, smiling when Thomas or Jason were around, but her eyes were colder when they met mine. I avoided her as much as I could. We both pretended things were fine, like two actors trapped in a play that had already gone wrong. But the truth was, this didn't start with the baby. It had been building for years, quietly and cleverly, like water seeping through the cracks of a wall. It began one afternoon, about 5 years earlier. I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting mail when Melissa came in, cheerful and efficient as always. She asked if she could help set up our online bill payments. She said it would save us time, keep things organized. Thomas had just retired from the bank, and I still handled most of the household bills by check. Melissa laughed lightly and said that was a little old-fashioned. At first, it sounded kind. She offered to teach me how to pay bills online, but somehow it turned into her doing it herself. She explained that she had a degree in accounting, that she could make sure nothing was ever late again. Thomas agreed without hesitation. "She's good at this stuff, Ellie," he said. "Let her help." So I did. I let her help. In the beginning, she kept us informed. She printed out statements and left them on the kitchen counter. Then, slowly, the papers stopped coming. When I asked, she said everything was handled electronically now, and there was no need for clutter. She changed the Wi-Fi password and wrote it on a note stuck to the fridge, but when I tried to use it, it didn't work. "Oh, I must have updated it again," she said casually. Jason worked long hours back then, picking up short-term IT jobs wherever he could. He was rarely home, and when he was, he didn't want conflict. If I mentioned something about Melissa's new way of managing the house, he'd shrug. "Mom, she's just trying to help you keep up with the times." One afternoon, Linda, our neighbor from across the street, knocked on the door holding a white envelope. "Looks like the mail carrier got mixed up again," she said with a smile. "This came to our box by mistake." I thanked her and glanced at the address. It was our home, but the name printed above it made my stomach twist. M. Grant Hayes. I took it inside, called Thomas, and handed him the letter. He frowned, opened the envelope, and his brow furrowed deeper. It was a utility bill from the city water department. The account holder was listed as Melissa Grant Hayes. "Why would this be in her name?" I asked quietly. Thomas didn't answer right away. He checked a few other bills stacked near the phone. Electric, gas, internet, all with the same name. That evening, after dinner, he mentioned it to Melissa while Jason watched television. She looked up from her phone, smiled sweetly, and said, "The system must have defaulted to my name, because I've been managing the accounts online. I'll fix it." Thomas nodded, unsure. Jason didn't even look up, but I saw something flicker in her eyes before she turned back to her screen. Not annoyance, not guilt, confidence, the kind of confidence that comes from knowing no one would challenge her. After that, small things started changing. The grocery list on the fridge became a spreadsheet. She emailed me once a week. If I bought something not on her list, she'd quietly move it to the back of the pantry or throw it out. "We're trying to eat healthier," she'd remind me, smiling like a teacher correcting a child. Passwords changed more often. She said it was for security reasons. When I needed to log in to pay for my garden supplies, I had to ask her to unlock the computer. Thomas began to notice too. One afternoon, while balancing his checkbook, he realized several automatic withdrawals had been made for bills we never discussed. When he asked Melissa about them, she brushed it off. "Oh, it's just a bundle payment option. Saves money in the long run." He told me later that night, sitting at the edge of our bed, his voice low. "I don't like it," he said, "but I don't want to start something with her." I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, feeling something growing inside me that I couldn't name yet, a kind of unease that had nowhere to go. Weeks passed, and one day I decided to check the filing cabinet where we kept all our household records. I hadn't looked through it in a while. I found folders neatly labeled with Melissa's handwriting, not mine. Electricity, gas, internet, insurance. Inside each one, every bill had her email address listed as the contact. At the back of the utilities folder, I found a photocopy of a document. It was a payment authorization form from the electric company. My eyes moved to the signature line. Thomas's name was there, but I knew his handwriting. This wasn't his. I sat frozen in the dim light of the office, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. My hands trembled as I held the paper. For a long moment, I told myself it must have been an old form, maybe a mix-up. But something in my gut told me otherwise. Thomas came in a few minutes later, holding a cup of coffee. "You're still up?" he asked. I handed him the paper. Did you sign this? He squinted at it, then shook his head slowly. No. Where did you find this? In our own files, I whispered. He stared at the signature again, his mouth tightening. It's close, he said quietly. But that's not mine. We looked at each other, neither of us speaking. The silence between us felt heavy, the kind of silence that says everything words can't. From that moment, the unease that had lived quietly in the corners of my mind turned into something sharper. I started noticing the way Melissa always intercepted the mail before I could get to it, how she checked the answering machine before anyone else, how she managed to make every part of our daily life flow through her hands first. Jason still defended her. He said she was helping, that we were being paranoid, but the truth was already sitting between us, in black ink on white paper. That night, I lay in bed listening to the desert wind rattle the windows, and I realized that Melissa wasn't just helping us. She was quietly taking control of everything we owned. I didn't know then how far she was willing to go, but I could feel it in my bones. Something had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. And while the house around me looked the same, it no longer felt like mine. It felt like we were living inside someone else's plan. Chapter 3. The Father's Awakening. Thomas started spending more time at his desk after that. I would hear the steady tap of his calculator keys, the rustle of papers, the low sighs that told me something wasn't adding up. He was a numbers man, patient and methodical, the kind of person who could balance a checkbook to the penny without needing a calculator. So when he told me he couldn't make sense of our accounts anymore, I knew it wasn't a mistake. He didn't say much that first week, only that something felt off. I watched him grow quieter, his brow furrowed over statements and bank printouts. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would wake up and see the light still on downstairs. One morning, he put on his old navy blazer, the one he used to wear to work at Flagstaff Bank and Trust, and told me he was going to meet someone for coffee. His tone was calm, but I could tell he was carrying something heavy in his chest. When he came home later, his face was pale. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time before speaking. I talked to Marilyn, he said finally. Marilyn Pierce had been his colleague for almost 20 years before he retired. She had a sharp mind and a reputation for catching things other people missed. What did she say? I asked. He looked down at his hands. Melissa opened a secondary account under Jason's name. She linked it to my retirement fund. Small withdrawals, regular, every month. For a moment, I didn't understand. Linked it? You mean, she's been using my account as a funding source, he said, his voice tightening. It's clever. Not enough to raise alarms. A few $100s at a time, transferred automatically. I felt the air go out of my lungs. Does Jason know? He shook his head. Marilyn says the online authorizations list Melissa's email as the primary contact. Jason's name is just on paper. I sat there, staring at the old oak table, the one Thomas built when Jason was a boy. My hands pressed flat against its surface, as if to steady myself. What are you going to do? I asked softly. He pushed back his chair. I'm going to talk to our son. When Jason came home that evening, the air in the house felt tight. Thomas waited until Melissa went upstairs to feed the baby, then motioned for Jason to sit. There's something we need to discuss, he began. Jason looked wary. What's wrong? Thomas slid a printed statement across the table. These are transfers from my retirement account to a secondary checking account under your name. Do you know about this? Jason frowned, scanning the paper. Are you sure that's not some kind of internal transfer? Maybe Mom set something up? Your mother didn't do this, Thomas said. His voice was calm, but there was a weight to it that made Jason shift in his seat. Jason's brows knit together. Then maybe Melissa was trying to organize things. She mentioned something about simplifying bills. Jason? Thomas said quietly. Jason blinked, then shook his head quickly. No, that can't be right. Melissa wouldn't do that. She already did, I said from the doorway. They both turned to look at me. And we have proof. Jason opened his mouth to speak. But before he could, Melissa appeared at the top of the stairs, the baby monitor in her hand. What's going on down here? She asked, her voice light but sharp at the edges. Thomas stood up. We're talking about the accounts. She descended slowly, every step measured. Accounts? She repeated, setting the monitor on the counter. You mean the bills? I told you I've been handling them. It's easier this way. You opened a new bank account under Jason's name. You connected it to my retirement fund. She froze for half a heartbeat, then her expression softened. Oh, that. It's just a temporary thing. The bank must have mixed up the linking process. I was just trying to make sure the utilities were paid. Jason looked between them, confused. Melissa, did you really do that? Her eyes filled instantly with tears. Jason? I've done everything to help, and now they're accusing me of stealing. That's not what we're saying, I said, trying to stay calm. We're saying we need transparency, that's all. She turned on me then, her tears gone as quickly as they had come. Transparency? I've been managing this household for years because you two can't keep up with technology, and now you're calling me a thief? Enough, Thomas said firmly. I want access to all accounts by tomorrow morning. Dad, maybe we should just take a step back. Melissa didn't mean any harm. Thomas's eyes hardened. Son, she took money that wasn't hers. That's harm. Melissa's voice cracked, but I could hear the calculation behind it. If you want me out of the finances, fine. I'll stop helping. But when bills go unpaid, don't come blaming me. Thomas didn't answer. He just turned and walked out of the house. The front door closed with a sound that seemed to echo through every wall. Jason ran a hand through his hair, his voice low. You didn't have to push him like that, Melissa. She crossed her arms. I was defending myself. I stayed quiet, standing by the counter, feeling the ground shift beneath me again. Later that night, Thomas came home long after dark. He didn't speak. He poured himself a glass of water, sat beside me on the couch, and stared at the silent television. Finally, he said softly. I didn't know what to say. Jason was our only child, and love makes blindness easy. When we went upstairs to bed, the house was silent except for the faint hum of the baby monitor still left on the kitchen counter. I turned it off, the click of the switch too loud in the stillness. Hours later, as I lay awake, I heard voices from downstairs. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then Melissa's tone drifted up, low and coaxing. Jason, just stay on my side. Your parents are old-fashioned. They don't understand how finances work anymore. Soon, this will all be ours, and we'll make things right. Jason didn't answer right away. I could only hear the faint creak of a chair, and then his sigh. My heart pounded as I lay frozen in the dark, listening to the woman who lived under our roof, whispering about taking what wasn't hers. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath, and for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't just afraid of her. I was afraid of what she might do next. Chapter 4. The Woman Who Fought Back. The next morning, I woke up with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't the kind that freezes you anymore. It was the kind that sharpens your focus, the kind that whispers do something. Thomas had already gone for his morning walk when I came downstairs. The house was still, the light pale and soft through the curtains. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched, and made a decision. If Melissa thought she could take our home, she would have to face proof stronger than her lies. I began with the study. It used to be Thomas's office, but Melissa had slowly taken over that space too. I knew every drawer, every file cabinet, every shelf. I bought a small camera at a hardware store in town, told the clerk it was for wildlife outside. He smiled politely, probably not believing me, but he didn't ask questions. I hid the camera high on the corner bookshelf, angled toward the desk. It blended perfectly between two decorative books Melissa had bought years ago, the ones she never read. I tested it once, then left it alone. The next day, I started copying everything I could find. Bank statements, digital bills, screenshots of online transactions. Linda helped me scan them on her home computer, since ours was now password protected. I told her the truth, every bit of it. Her face tightened as she listened. She didn't gasp or ask for gossip. She just said, "Let's make sure you're covered." She lent me a small voice recorder, the kind she used for church meetings. We placed it behind the row of hardcover encyclopedias on the lower shelf in the living room. I told her it was only for a few days. Weeks passed quietly. Melissa was confident again, laughing louder, talking on the phone late at night in the kitchen. I didn't let on that anything had changed. I cooked her meals, smiled politely, and pretended not to notice how she locked the office door when she worked on house finances. One afternoon, while cleaning, I went into that office after she left for the store. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, a sharp floral scent that always lingered too long. I wiped down the desk, dusted the shelves, and that was when I noticed a folder partially tucked behind the printer. It was thick, with the words Property Transfer, 1,241 Birchwood, Ave written neatly across the front in her handwriting. My hands went cold. I opened it slowly. Inside were printed pages, with property valuation notes, tax records, and even a copy of our deed. Near the bottom, in red ink, she had scribbled, "Confirm property value, file before June 2025. For a moment I couldn't move. The hum of the refrigerator sounded distant, my pulse loud in my ears. Then I carefully closed the folder, slid it back exactly where it had been, and left the room as quietly as I could. When Thomas came home that evening, I handed him a cup of tea and told him what I'd found. He sat very still as I spoke, his eyes narrowing, the muscle in his jaw twitching. "Property transfer," he repeated slowly. "That's not a mistake. That's a plan." We went to see a lawyer the next morning. His name was Richard Cole, an old friend of Thomas's from his banking days. His office sat in a small brick building on Montezuma Street, lined with framed degrees and family photos. He listened without interrupting, his expression calm but serious. When I showed him the copies I had made, he nodded. "What she's attempting," he said finally, "is to establish a tenancy claim. By handling your finances and maintaining residence here for several years, she could attempt to argue partial ownership. It's rare, but not impossible, especially if she can show she contributes financially to the property." Thomas leaned forward. "Can she win?" Richard shook his head. "Not if you have evidence. Keep everything. Emails, records, any sign that she's managing things without consent. Do not confront her yet. Let her talk." That night, I told Thomas I wanted to keep the camera and recorder running. He hesitated but agreed. "We'll do this quietly," he said. "Let her bury herself." Melissa still took charge of bills and appointments, still rearranged my pantry as if it were hers. I let her. She didn't know I had every transaction saved to a separate drive hidden in my sewing box. One evening, when Thomas was outside watering the garden, I heard Melissa on the phone. Her voice carried from the kitchen, low but confident. The recorder on the shelf caught every word. "No, they don't suspect anything," she said, laughing softly. "I've got everything set. Once the documents are finalized, it's done. The old man doesn't even check anymore. When they're old, the house will be mine. Jason's easy to control." My hands shook as I folded laundry in the next room. For a moment, I felt sick, my breath shallow, But then something inside me settled, not with fear, but resolve. Later that night, Thomas and I sat on the back porch, the desert air cool and still. I told him what she'd said. He stared out at the horizon for a long time, the last light fading behind the mountains. "We'll handle this the right way," he said finally. "No yelling. No fights. She won't see it coming." I nodded, watching the stars begin to appear. For the first time in months, I felt calm. I thought of the years we had spent building that home. Every nail, every coat of paint. I thought of how easily she had walked in and claimed it as hers. But she had underestimated us, mistaking kindness for weakness. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan, I realized something had shifted again. Only this time inside me. I was done being afraid. Done pretending not to see. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, steady and certain. I had been silent long enough. Chapter 5. The Imposters. 2 weeks later, a white pickup truck pulled into our driveway late in the morning. I was watering the flowers near the porch when a man stepped out, dressed neatly in khakis and a shirt that had a small county logo printed on the chest. He carried a clipboard and a smile that looked professional enough to pass for real. "I'm with the Yavapai County Assessor's Office. We're updating property valuations in your area. Won't take more than a few minutes." Thomas came outside, wiping his hands on a towel. "Everything all right?" The man nodded, flashing an ID badge too quickly for me to read. "Just a standard property review. Nothing to worry about. I just need to confirm a few details about the home and have you sign some forms." I felt uneasy. "Do you have an appointment?" He smiled again. "No, ma'am. This is part of our field audit. We've been working through the neighborhood all week." Thomas hesitated. He'd always trusted official-looking people. Old habits from his years at the bank. He followed the man to the porch, listening as he talked about tax records and valuation adjustments. I stayed by the steps, watching, something in my stomach twisting tighter with every word. When the man handed him a stack of papers to sign, I wanted to speak, but Thomas gave me that look that said, "It's fine, Ellie." So I kept quiet. He signed 2 pages, handed them back, and the man thanked him warmly. "You'll get the updated documents in the mail soon," he said, then walked back to his truck and drove off down the street. As the sound of the engine faded, I turned to Thomas. Something about that felt wrong. He frowned, watching the dust settle on the road. He had ID. He knew our names. He knew too much, I said softly. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling. The next morning, I called Richard and told him everything. He asked for the name on the badge. I couldn't remember. He said he'd check with the county office. When he called back that afternoon, his voice was grim. "Eleanor, no one from the Yavapai County Assessor's Office visited your address this week, and they don't do door-to-door reviews without notice." I felt my chest tighten. "Then who was he?" "Someone trying to get documentation," he said. "If Thomas signed anything with your address or property details, it could be used to validate a fraudulent claim." "Do you still have copies?" I closed my eyes. He took them with him. Thomas sat beside me, his hand trembling slightly as he ran it through his hair. "I didn't even read them, Ellie. I thought it was routine. Richard told us to come in immediately." He looked over the property records, explaining that if those papers included our signatures alongside property information, Melissa could use them as part of a residency affidavit. When he said her name, the room went quiet. "Do you think she sent that man?" Thomas asked. "I can't prove it," Richard said, "but it fits her pattern." That night, Thomas didn't eat dinner. He sat outside for hours, staring at the dark yard. I watched from the kitchen window, the sound of the clock ticking louder than usual. The next morning, Melissa acted as if nothing had happened. She brewed coffee, chatted about the weather, and asked Jason to pick up formula for the baby. But when Thomas told her someone had come by claiming to be from the assessor's office, her hand froze around her mug. "Oh, really?" she said, her tone too casual. "Probably just routine. They do that sometimes." Richard checked. They didn't. For the first time, I saw a flicker of panic cross her face before she recovered. "Then maybe it was a mistake. You know how government offices are." She laughed lightly and left the room. Later that day, Jason pulled into the driveway. I saw him through the window, standing outside his truck for a long time before coming in. He had that uncertain look he always wore when he felt caught between two sides. At dinner, he finally spoke. "Dad, what exactly happened yesterday?" Thomas told him the story quietly. Jason frowned. "Melissa didn't mention any of this to me." "She wouldn't," I said before I could stop myself. Jason looked at me, his jaw tightening. "You think she sent that guy?" I didn't answer, just met his eyes. The silence between us was answer enough. He rubbed his face. "Mom, Dad, you're making this sound worse than it is." Thomas's voice came out low and firm. "Your wife has been manipulating our accounts for years. Now she's sending people to our house. You need to start paying attention." Jason didn't reply. 2 days later, Emily arrived from Seattle for Thomas's birthday. She walked in carrying a cake box and balloons, but the moment she saw our faces, she set them down gently and said, "What's going on?" We told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her eyes hardening with every word. "We're letting Richard handle it. He's building a case." Emily's voice rose. "Dad, she's breaking the law. What if she tries something worse next time?" Thomas's hand covered hers. "We're being careful." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was one I recognized immediately. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Dr. Caroline Brooks. I'm Jason's counselor." I hesitated. "Is something wrong?" She spoke quietly, as if unsure whether to say what she was about to. "I thought you should know." During one of our sessions, Melissa asked me a hypothetical question. She wanted to know if an elderly person could legally transfer property if they were confused or under stress. She framed it as research for a friend, but it didn't sit right with me. I felt the world tilt slightly. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles hurt. Did she say anything else? Only that she needed to understand how it worked in case she ever had to take care of family matters. I didn't think much of it at the time. Now I'm not so sure. I thanked her, my voice shaking. When I hung up, Thomas looked up from the couch where he had been reading. "Who was that?" I set the phone down carefully. "Caroline Brooks, Jason's therapist." He frowned. "Why would she call you?" I stared at the floor, my throat dry. "Because Melissa asked her how to take someone's house if they were too confused to stop her." The room went completely still. The only sound was the slow ticking of the clock. Thomas whispered, "She didn't just want our home." I nodded, my voice steady now. The fear burned away by something colder. She wanted to erase us from it. Chapter 6: The Investigation and the Reckoning. The next morning, Richard called and said he had contacted a private investigator he trusted, someone who had handled financial fraud before. His name was Mark Sullivan, a retired detective from the Prescott Police Department who now worked with civil attorneys. When Thomas and I met him in Richard's office, he was calm, observant, and spoke with the kind of steady authority that made you believe him immediately. He asked questions for over an hour, never interrupting, writing everything down in a small leather notebook. When I told him about the imposter who came to the house and the folder marked property transfer, his eyes narrowed slightly. "She's methodical," he said. "That's what makes her dangerous." Richard handed him copies of our bank statements and the screenshots I had taken. Mark promised to look deeper. "Before we left," he said quietly, "don't confront her again." The goal now is to prove the pattern, not provoke her. For the next 2 weeks, we lived as if nothing had changed. Melissa still played the perfect daughter-in-law, cheerful and generous, cooking dinners, sending texts to family friends about how grateful she was to live with us. Jason started noticing the cracks, though. Her phone was always turned face down, and she started locking the home office. One afternoon, Mark came by pretending to deliver a package. He left a small camera near the doorframe and a listening device inside a fake wall outlet in the office. He worked quickly and efficiently, nodding once at me before he left. 3 days later, Richard called. They had found several fake authorizations from Flagstaff Bank and Trust, all bearing Thomas's name. Every one of them was traced back to Melissa's computer. She had even used our home IP address to access the county tax website under a fake employee login. Mark confirmed that the imposter assessor was a man she had hired through an online freelancer platform. Payment had been made through her secondary account. Thomas sat in stunned silence as Richard went through the evidence. I felt something inside me unclench. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was validation. The next step was the hardest. Jason was called into Richard's office for questioning. Thomas and I waited outside, the hallway quiet except for the faint hum of a printer. After almost an hour, the door opened. Jason stepped out, his eyes red, his face pale. He didn't look at us at first. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't want to see it." I reached for his hand. "You see it now. That's what matters." He nodded weakly, then leaned against the wall, his shoulders shaking. "She told me you were exaggerating, that you were losing it." I believed her. Thomas put a hand on his shoulder. "We all wanted to believe her, son. That's how people like her work." When we returned home, Melissa was already waiting in the living room. She must have seen the look on Jason's face because her expression hardened. "You talked to them, didn't you?" she said. Jason didn't answer. "Jason," she said again, her voice sharp now. "You told them things that don't concern them." He finally looked at her. "They were my parents. It always concerned me." Her tone softened instantly, her eyes filling with tears. "If you do this, you'll destroy your family. Is that what you want? You'll ruin Oliver's life. You'll ruin us." Jason shook his head. "You already did that." He picked up his bag and walked down the hallway to the guest room. The door closed behind him, and the sound of the lock clicking was like a final line being drawn. Melissa stood frozen for a moment, then turned toward me. "You did this," she hissed. "You turned him against me." I stayed calm. "I didn't turn him. You pushed him." Her face twisted, but she didn't say another word. She went upstairs, her steps heavy, the baby monitor clutched tightly in her hand. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. She barely spoke to anyone, only moved around the house with that tense, brittle energy that made everyone uneasy. Thomas and I avoided her when we could. Jason kept to himself, spending most of his time with Oliver in the backyard. Then, one afternoon, an envelope appeared in the mail. No return address. The handwriting was familiar. My stomach dropped as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Stop, or I'll sue you for defamation." No greeting, no signature, just that line, written in the same looping script Melissa used on grocery lists and birthday cards. I stared at it for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. Then I walked to the living room, where Thomas sat reading, and handed it to him. He looked at it once, his mouth tightening. "She's desperate. She thinks she can still scare us," I said quietly. I walked to the fireplace. The air outside was cool enough that we had started using it again in the evenings. The flames licked gently at the logs, steady and calm. I held the letter over the fire, watched the edges curl, darken, and fall apart into ash. As the last piece disappeared, I felt the fear drain out of me. Not all at once, but like water slowly receding after a storm. She doesn't realize, I said softly, half to myself. The truth is already out of her hands. That night, the wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. I lay awake beside Thomas, the faint scent of smoke still clinging to my hair. I thought about the months ahead, the hearings, the questions, the confrontation that was coming. I was no longer afraid of her. I was afraid of what we might learn next. And yet, beneath that fear, there was something else, something steady, something strong. For the first time, I knew that we were no longer the ones being hunted. We were the ones who had started the reckoning. Chapter 7. The Court of Truth. The hearing was set for late April. The morning it began, the sky over Flagstaff was cold and colorless, the kind of gray that makes everything look suspended in time. Thomas drove us to the courthouse in silence. Jason sat in the back seat, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. None of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. The Coconino County Civil Court stood low and solid against the pale horizon. Inside, the halls smelled faintly of paper and coffee. We walked through security, took our seats, and waited. Melissa was already there. She sat beside her attorney, David Connor, in a dark blue suit, her posture perfect, her face calm. Only her hands betrayed her, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. When she looked over at us, she smiled. It was a small, deliberate smile, the kind that says, "I'm still in control." I felt Thomas tense beside me. I placed my hand over his, grounding him, grounding myself. The judge entered, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a measured tone. She greeted no one, simply nodded to the bailiff and began. Richard stood to present our case, his voice steady, his words careful and precise. He laid out every detail like stones in a path, one leading cleanly to the next. He began with the forged authorizations. Each document was projected on the screen, the signature identical but wrong. Then came the fake inspection papers, the bank records, the emails traced directly to Melissa's laptop. Finally, the recording played through the courtroom speakers. Her voice filled the room. Clear and unhurried. When they're old, the house will be mine. Jason's easy to control. I could feel the blood rush to my face, my pulse pounding in my ears. Around us, the room had gone very still. Melissa stared straight ahead, her jaw locked, but her hand gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles whitened. Detective Sullivan took the stand next. His testimony was simple and damning. He walked the court through the timeline of transactions, the online accounts, the payments made to the imposter. When he finished, he turned toward the judge. There was intent at every step, he said plainly. This was not a misunderstanding. When it was Melissa's turn, her attorney spoke first, trying to frame her actions as disorganization and poor communication. He said she had only been trying to streamline household finances. But when Melissa herself stood, the calm mask cracked. She spoke quickly, her words sharp. I was the only one managing the bills. They left everything to me. Then they started accusing me of theft. I've been treated like a criminal in my own home. Eleanor never liked me. She's been jealous from the beginning. Mrs. Hayes, she said to me, would you like to respond? I stood, my knees shaking slightly, and walked to the front. I didn't look at Melissa as I spoke. I looked at the judge, then at the papers spread across the table. We took her in when she had nowhere else to go. We trusted her with everything we built. She didn't just take money. She tried to take our name off our own home. My voice didn't tremble. I surprised myself with that. Melissa laughed quietly. They're exaggerating. They just want control back. That was when Jason rose from his seat. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room. Stop lying. She turned toward him. startled. "You didn't just lie to me," he said, his voice cracking. "You tried to destroy the people who raised me. You used me to do it." He took a step forward, his hands shaking. "I loved you. I believed you. And you used that love to hurt my family." Melissa opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just stared at him, her expression breaking for the first time since the trial began. I looked at Jason then. His shoulders were squared, his face pale, but his eyes were clear. For the first time in years, I saw the boy I had raised, the one who used to run through the backyard with dirt on his shoes and laughter in his voice. The judge called for order. The room fell silent again, the air heavy with everything unsaid. After the recess, the judge returned with her ruling. She spoke evenly, each word precise. "The evidence," she said, "was overwhelming. Melissa Grant Hayes was guilty of financial abuse and identity fraud. She would serve 18 months of probation, pay restitution, and was prohibited from contacting us under a restraining order." Melissa didn't move. She stared down at the table as the words washed over her. Her attorney touched her arm, but she didn't respond. Thomas exhaled slowly beside me. Richard placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I looked at the woman who had spent years under our roof, smiling across our dinner table, rocking my grandson to sleep, pretending to belong. She had tried to turn kindness into weakness, trust into a weapon. Now she sat in silence, stripped of the one thing she thought she could control. The judge's gavel fell once, the sound echoing through the chamber. The bailiff announced the session adjourned. As the crowd began to move, I turned to Thomas and squeezed his hand. His eyes were wet but steady. "At last," I whispered, "justice has a shape." Outside, the sky had cleared. The sun came through the clouds, glinting off the courthouse windows. We stood on the steps for a moment, breathing in the cold, clean air. Jason came up beside us. He didn't speak, only took my hand in his and gave it a small, wordless squeeze. For the first time in a long time, I felt light, not happy exactly, but unburdened. The truth had finally stood up on its own. As we walked back to the car, I looked over my shoulder one last time. Melissa was still inside, surrounded by lawyers and papers, her face turned away. And in that moment, I knew that whatever came next, she would never again have power over us. Chapter 8. The Price and the Dawn. A year passed, slow and steady, like the rhythm of a clock finally keeping time again. The house felt different now. The air was lighter, the rooms quieter, in a good way, the kind of quiet that means peace rather than tension. Melissa was gone. She left town a few weeks after the sentencing. Richard said she moved to a small apartment in Cottonwood. We heard she lost her job at the accounting firm. That word spread about what she had done. Even in a place as forgiving as this town, some things followed you no matter how far you ran. Jason stayed. He sold their old car, found work with a local tech repair shop, and rented a small house a few blocks from ours. He came by most mornings with Oliver, who had just turned 2. Watching my grandson run barefoot across the grass made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, something like hope. Life didn't go back to what it had been before. It grew into something quieter, humbler, but steadier. Thomas planted tomatoes again, filling the backyard with neat rows of green vines. I started baking on Sundays the way I used to, filling the kitchen with the smell of cinnamon and coffee. Sometimes, in the evenings, we would sit on the porch swing, the sky turning pink behind the pines, and we wouldn't need to say a word. One afternoon, as the wind brushed through the trees, Jason stopped by with Oliver. The little boy ran straight into my arms, sticky with juice and sunlight. I laughed, holding him close, breathing in the scent of grass and innocence. Thomas handed Jason a cup of coffee and smiled. "You're looking more like your old self these days." Jason nodded. "Some days are better than others, but it's getting there." He looked down at Oliver, who was trying to chase a butterfly. He keeps me grounded. I touched his arm lightly. You're doing better than you think, sweetheart. He hesitated, his voice soft. I still think about her sometimes, about how I didn't see it sooner. That's what love does, I said quietly. It blinds us to what we don't want to believe. He gave a faint smile, one that looked like forgiveness trying to find its way through. The patch of earth that had once been torn up and trampled now bloomed again, white petals open wide to the sun. I knelt beside them, brushing the soil from my palms. They were stubborn, I said, but they came back. Oliver laughed as he ran through the grass, chasing the butterfly that always seemed just out of reach. His laughter filled the air, bright and unbroken. Thomas stood near the porch steps, holding 2 mugs of coffee, one for me and one for him. His eyes caught mine, and for a moment, everything felt whole again. The years behind us had taken their toll. There were scars in places no one could see, small cracks that time might never fully seal, but there was beauty too, in survival, in truth, in the way the light touched the house as if blessing it for having endured. Sometimes, when I thought about Melissa, I didn't feel anger anymore. I pictured her alone in that apartment, the blinds drawn, the silence pressing in. Loneliness has a way of finishing what justice begins. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her pain. I simply hoped she would learn what we all must learn eventually, that taking from others never fills the emptiness inside yourself. That night, after Jason and Oliver went home, Thomas and I sat on the back porch. The air was cool, the scent of pine heavy and familiar. The stars were beginning to appear, one by one. He handed me my coffee and smiled. You ever think we'd get here? I shook my head. No. But I'm grateful we did. He reached for my hand, and I let him hold it, the way he always had when words weren't enough. For a long while, we didn't speak. The cicadas buzzed in the distance, and somewhere a dog barked once, then quieted. I thought about everything we had lost, and everything we had kept. I thought about the moment the judge's gavel came down, and the way Jason's voice had steadied in that courtroom. I thought about the garden, the flowers, the laughter, and the quiet strength that had carried us through. We didn't win by revenge, we won by protecting what was right. That was what mattered. As the porch light flickered softly, I looked out at the yard where Oliver had played earlier that day. The daisies swayed gently in the night breeze, alive again, resilient. I took a slow breath, feeling peace settle deep into my bones. Sometimes justice doesn't need weapons. It needs patience. It needs faith. It needs the quiet conviction that truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home. If you've ever been betrayed, hold on. Keep your head high, keep your heart clean, and keep believing, because in the end, the light always returns to the places that were once broken.